In quiet Millbrook, a 72-year-old widow was about to uncover her family's devastating betrayal. What started as preparing Sunday dinner took a shocking turn when she came face to face with a conspiracy by her own children. Zenaida Matthew wasn't your typical grandmother. For decades, she had built a catering empire, known for her sharp business instincts and fierce protective nature. When her grandson Tommy whispered urgent warnings, she had no idea she was walking into a scheme to steal her independence. Zenaida's response would lead to a psychological war that shattered everything. What began as family dinner became a deadly game of deception that would prove the most dangerous person is often the one everyone underestimates. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The scent of curry and coconut milk filled every corner of Zenaida Matthew's kitchen, a warm embrace that had welcomed her family for decades. At 72, her hands moved with the practiced precision of someone who had built a catering empire from nothing more than her grandmother's recipes and an unshakable belief in the power of good food to heal hearts. The Sunday ritual had become even more sacred since Robert's passing. These weekly gatherings were her anchor in a world that sometimes felt too quiet, too empty, without his gentle laughter echoing through their Millbrook home. She ladled the stewed chicken into her grandmother's ceramic serving bowl, the one with the hand-painted hibiscus flowers that had survived the journey from Trinidad 43 years ago. Every detail mattered. The rice had to be perfectly fluffy, the plantains golden brown, the callaloo seasoned just right. These weren't merely meals. They were love letters to her family, written in flavors that told the story of where they came from and who they had become. "Mama, we're here!" David's voice carried from the front door, followed by the familiar chaos of her grandson Tommy's sneakers against the hardwood floors. Zenaida smiled, wiping her hands on the dish towel Robert had given her last Christmas, a silly thing covered in dancing mangoes that made her laugh every time she used it. "In the kitchen, my loves," she called back, but something in David's tone made her pause. There was a tightness there, a forced cheerfulness that reminded her of the voice he'd used as a child when he'd broken something and was trying to work up the courage to confess. She'd heard it too often these past few months. Tommy burst through the kitchen doorway like a small hurricane, his face lighting up when he saw her. At 8 years old, he was all elbows and knees and endless questions, but his eyes, those were old eyes, wise beyond his years in a way that sometimes worried her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pressing his face into her apron. "Grandma Z, it smells like heaven in here." "That's because your great-grandmother's watching over this kitchen," Zenaida said, stroking his dark hair. "She always made sure the food turned out perfect when it mattered most." Behind Tommy, David appeared in the doorway, and Zenaida's maternal radar immediately picked up the signs of stress she'd been noticing more frequently. Her eldest son looked tired, not just tired, but hollowed out somehow, as if something essential was eating at him from the inside. His smile was too bright, his hug too brief, and when she tried to catch his eyes, he looked away. "How's my hard-working son?" she asked, keeping her voice light despite the growing knot in her stomach. "Oh, you know, same old grind," David replied, his hands fidgeting with his car keys. "The market's been challenging." Before she could probe deeper, Lisa swept into the kitchen with a kind of entrance that demanded attention. Zenaida's daughter-in-law had always possessed that quality, the ability to command a room simply by walking into it. Today she wore a cream-colored sweater that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget, and her smile was perfect, practiced, warm enough to fool almost anyone. "Zenaida, darling, you've outdone yourself again," Lisa said, leaning in for the air kiss that never quite connected. "The whole house smells incredible. I don't know how you do it at your age." "At your age?" The words hung in the air like a small poison, delivered with such practiced sweetness that anyone overhearing might think it was a compliment. But Zenaida caught the subtle emphasis, the way Lisa's eyes assessed her movements, as if cataloging each step for some invisible scorecard. "Experience, dear," Zenaida replied smoothly. 40 years of feeding people teaches you a few things." Marcus arrived fashionably late, as always, carrying a bouquet of expensive flowers and wearing his most charming smile. Zenaida's younger son had inherited Robert's gift for making people feel like they were the most important person in the room, but lately that charm felt strained, almost desperate. "For the most beautiful woman in Millbrook," Marcus said with a theatrical bow, presenting the flowers with a flourish that would have made her laugh if she hadn't noticed how his hands trembled slightly as he handed them over. "You're going to spoil me," she said, accepting the bouquet and noting how Marcus's eyes darted nervously around the kitchen, as if he were assessing the value of everything in it. As the family settled into their familiar rhythm of setting the table and carrying dishes to the dining room, Zenaida found herself paying attention to things she'd previously overlooked. The way David and Marcus exchanged glances when they thought she wasn't looking. How Lisa positioned herself to observe Zenaida's every movement, while maintaining a stream of cheerful chatter about neighborhood gossip and Tommy's school activities. The subtle tension that seemed to thicken whenever the conversation touched on anything related to Zenaida's independence or daily routines. When Lisa casually mentioned that Mrs. Henderson from down the street had recently moved to a lovely assisted living community, Zenaida felt something cold settle in her chest. The comment was delivered with practiced casualness, but it landed with the weight of a suggestion, a seed planted with surgical precision. "Such a smart woman," Lisa continued, helping Tommy with his napkin. She realized she needed more support before it became a crisis. Very forward-thinking of her. Zenaida murmured noncommittally, but her mind was already racing. Mrs. Henderson had been sharp as a tack the last time they'd spoken. What kind of crisis could have necessitated such a dramatic change? During dinner, Tommy chattered about school and his friends, but Zenaida noticed how the adults seemed to be having two conversations. The surface one about everyday life, and another one conducted entirely in glances and carefully chosen words. When Marcus asked seemingly innocent questions about her banking arrangements and whether she'd considered consolidating her accounts for security purposes, she felt that cold feeling spread further through her chest. "I'm quite happy with my current arrangements," she said carefully, watching how his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly at her response. "Of course, Mama," David interjected quickly. "Marcus was just thinking about your convenience. You know, as we all get older, sometimes it helps to simplify things." Get older. Another carefully placed phrase, delivered with love, but carrying an edge that made her skin prickle. She was 72, not 92, and her mind was as sharp as it had ever been. Yet suddenly, everyone seemed concerned about her age, her convenience, her need for support. After dinner, while the adults lingered over coffee and moved their conversation to the living room, Tommy volunteered to help with the dishes. Zenaida was grateful for the company and the chance to process what she'd been observing. In the kitchen, away from the others, Tommy seemed more relaxed, more like himself. "Grandma Z," he said quietly, standing on his step stool to reach the sink. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. You can ask me anything." Tommy glanced toward the living room, where the murmur of adult conversation created a buffer of white noise. His small hands gripped the dish towel tightly, and when he looked up at her, those old eyes were troubled. When grown-ups talk in whispers, does that mean they're planning something? Zenaida's hands stilled on the plate she was washing. "What kind of whispers, Tommy?" He looked toward the doorway again, then moved closer to her, the kind that stop when you walk into the room, the kind that happen when they think nobody's listening. A chill ran down Zenaida's spine, but she kept her voice gentle and curious. "Have you heard whispers like that?" Tommy nodded, his expression serious beyond his years. "Mom and Dad and Uncle Marcus. They've been having lots of meetings. And last week, when I was supposed to be asleep, I heard Mom say something about you not being able to take care of yourself anymore." The plate slipped from Zenaida's hands, clattering against the bottom of the sink, but fortunately not breaking. She gripped the edge of the counter, feeling the world tilt slightly off its axis. "What else did you hear, baby?" Tommy's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "They said something about making decisions for you. And Uncle Marcus said time was running out." He looked up at her with eyes full of worry and love. "Grandma, they're planning something bad." The words hit her like a physical blow, not because she didn't believe Tommy, but because deep down she realized she'd been sensing this for weeks. All those little comments about her age, the questions about her routines, the way conversations stopped when she entered rooms, it all clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Zenaida knelt down until she was at Tommy's eye level, taking his small hands in hers. They were warm and slightly damp from the dish towel, and she held onto them like anchors in a suddenly unstable world. "Tommy, I need you to listen to me very carefully," she said, keeping her voice calm despite the storm raging in her chest. "You haven't done anything wrong by telling me this. In fact, you've been very brave and very smart to pay attention. But I need you to promise me something." His eyes were wide but trusting. "What, Grandma?" "I need you to promise that you won't tell anyone else about our conversation tonight. Not your parents, not your uncle, not anyone at school. Can you do that for me?" Tommy nodded solemnly. "I promise. But Grandma, are you in trouble?" Zenaida managed a smile that she hoped looked more confident than she felt. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. But whatever happens, I want you to remember that your grandmother isn't nearly as helpless as some people might think. And I want you to know that no matter what anyone says or does, I will always protect you. Always." From the living room, Lisa's voice called out, "Tommy, come say goodbye, honey. We need to get you home for your bath." Tommy hugged Zenaida tightly, and she held him close, breathing in the scent of his hair and trying to memorize the feeling of his small arms around her neck. When he pulled back, she saw something in his expression that broke her heart. A premature understanding that the world was more complicated and dangerous than he'd realized. As the family prepared to leave, Zenaida went through the motions of their usual farewell routine. Hugs and kisses and promises to see each other next week. Lisa's reminder to, quote, "take care of yourself," delivered with that same perfect smile. David's awkward hug and his inability to meet her eyes. Marcus's overly enthusiastic embrace and his whispered promise to check on her soon. After they left, Zenaida stood in her living room, surrounded by the detritus of family dinner, coffee cups and dessert plates, the lingering scent of her cooking, the flowers Marcus had brought now arranged in her favorite vase. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 3 hours ago, but nothing would ever be the same again. She walked slowly through her house, seeing it suddenly through different eyes. This wasn't just her home anymore, it was apparently a problem to be solved, an asset to be managed, a burden to be shouldered. The family photos lining the hallway seemed to mock her. All those smiling faces, all those years of love and sacrifice and support, leading to this moment when her own children were plotting to strip away her independence. In her bedroom, she sat heavily on the bed she'd shared with Robert for 35 years and tried to process what Tommy had revealed. Her 8-year-old grandson had just told her that her family, the people she'd loved and nurtured and supported through every crisis and celebration, were conspiring against her. And the most terrifying part was that she believed him completely. But as the initial shock began to fade, something else took its place. Something harder and more dangerous than hurt or betrayal. Robert had always said that Zenaida Matthew was stronger than she looked, smarter than people gave her credit for, and more stubborn than a hurricane when her family was threatened. If David, Lisa, and Marcus thought they were dealing with a helpless old woman, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. She pulled out the leather-bound journal she'd kept since Robert's death, originally intended as a grief diary, but now about to become something else entirely. Tomorrow, she would begin her own investigation. She would uncover the full scope of their plan, document everything she found, and prepare her defense. Because if there was one thing 43 years of marriage and 30 years of running a business had taught her, it was that knowledge was power, and she intended to gather as much of both as possible. The war for her life and independence was about to begin, and Zenaida Matthew had no intention of surrendering without a fight. Marcus's hand trembled almost imperceptibly as he reached for his coffee cup, but Zenaida caught the movement. In the 48 hours since Tommy's whispered warning, she had become hyper-aware of every gesture, every glance, every carefully chosen word that fell from her family's lips. The revelation had stripped away the comfortable veil of trust she'd worn for 72 years, leaving her raw and exposed to truths she'd been unconsciously avoiding. She sat at her kitchen table Tuesday morning, ostensibly reading the newspaper while actually replaying Sunday's dinner conversation in microscopic detail. Lisa's comment about Mrs. Henderson, Marcus's questions about her banking, David's nervous energy and inability to meet her eyes. Each memory felt like pressing on a fresh bruise, painful but necessary to understand the full extent of the damage. The phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. Lisa's name appeared on the caller ID, and Zenaida felt her pulse quicken. She let it ring twice more before answering, using the time to compose her voice into its usual warm greeting. "Good morning, dear. Zenaida, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Lisa's voice carried that particular brightness she used when she wanted something. "I was just thinking about you and wondering how you're feeling after Sunday. You seemed a little tired." There it was, the subtle suggestion wrapped in concern. Zenaida gripped the phone tighter. "I feel perfectly fine, Lisa. Why would you think otherwise?" "Oh, just little things. You seemed a bit confused when Marcus was asking about your bank accounts, and you forgot to put salt in the rice." David and I were just concerned. The rice had been perfectly seasoned, and Zenaida had been anything but confused about Marcus's probing questions. But here was Lisa, already beginning to construct a narrative of decline, planting seeds that could later bloom into evidence of incompetence. "The rice was fine, dear. Perhaps your palate was off." Zenaida kept her tone light, almost amused, but she was making mental notes. Documentation. That's what Lisa was doing, creating a record of supposed incidents that could be used against her later. "Of course, you're probably right. I just worry, Living alone in that big house at your age. Have you given any more thought to what we discussed about maybe having someone come in to help?" Just for peace of mind. They hadn't discussed anything of the sort, but Lisa was speaking as if it were an established conversation, a mutual concern they'd already explored. It was masterfully done, casual gaslighting wrapped in loving concern. "I manage quite well on my own," Zenaida replied. "I've been doing it for 2 years now." "Oh, absolutely. I just meant for the future. We all want to make sure you're safe and comfortable. Maybe we could set up a time this week for me to come over? I could help you organize some of your paperwork, make sure everything's in order." Paperwork, financial records, legal documents. Zenaida felt a chill run down her spine as she realized the full scope of what Lisa was suggesting. Access to her private affairs under the guise of helpfulness. "That won't be necessary, but thank you for thinking of me." There was a pause, and when Lisa spoke again, her voice had shifted almost imperceptibly. Still warm, but with an undertone of frustration that someone more trusting might have missed. "Well, if you change your mind, just let me know. David and I are here for you, whatever you need." After hanging up, Zenaida sat in the silence of her kitchen, processing the conversation. Lisa was moving faster than she'd expected, already laying groundwork for some kind of intervention. The mention of organizing paperwork was particularly troubling. It suggested they needed access to her financial information to move forward with whatever they were planning. She thought about Tommy's words. They said something about making decisions for you. The pieces were beginning to form a terrifying picture. If they could establish that she was declining mentally, becoming confused and forgetful, they could petition for guardianship. David as her son would be the obvious choice for guardian, giving them legal control over her assets and decisions. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just about money, though she suspected that was driving it. This was about stripping away her autonomy, her right to make her own choices, her independence. They wanted to reduce her from a capable woman to a managed asset. Zenaida rose from the table and walked to Robert's old study, a room she'd barely entered since his death. His desk still held the organized chaos he'd thrived in. Financial documents, business papers, investment portfolios. She'd left it largely untouched, unable to face the task of sorting through 40 years of accumulated paperwork. Now she realized that avoidance might have been a mistake. She began systematically going through the files, looking for anything that might give her insight into her family's financial situations. Robert had always been generous with the children, helping David through various business ventures and supporting Marcus during his career transitions. But had that generosity created dependency? Expectation? In a folder marked Family Financials, she found documents that made her stomach clench. David had borrowed against his expected inheritance multiple times, using his mother's estate as collateral for business loans that had apparently gone bad. The amounts were staggering, far more than she'd realized he was struggling with. Marcus's situation was equally troubling. Bank statements showed erratic deposits and withdrawals, patterns consistent with gambling. Large sums disappearing, followed by desperate transfers from various sources. But it was the document at the bottom of the folder that made her hands shake. A printout of her own bank account activity, dated from just last week. Transactions she'd made, deposits from her pension and investments, her account balance, all information that should have been private. Someone had been monitoring her financial activity. Marcus. He'd worked in finance before whatever had derailed his career. He would know how to access financial information, especially if he'd maintained any of Robert's old banking contacts or had legitimate seeming reasons for making inquiries. She sank into Robert's leather chair, overwhelmed by the scope of the betrayal. This wasn't a recent decision born of desperation. This was a calculated, long-term plan. They'd been watching her, documenting her activities, assessing her vulnerabilities, and positioning themselves for what exactly? The answer came to her with horrible clarity. They needed her to appear incompetent to justify taking control. But they also needed her to remain alive long enough to sign over power of attorney, or to have guardianship legally established. This wasn't about putting her in a care facility for her own good. It was about gaining access to her assets while maintaining plausible deniability about their motives. A sound from the front of the house interrupted her thoughts. The doorbell, followed by a familiar voice calling out, "Mom, are you home?" David. Zenaida quickly gathered the documents and locked them in Robert's desk drawer, pocketing the key. She took a moment to compose herself, then walked to the front door, noting that her son looked even more haggard than he had on Sunday. "David, sweetheart, what a nice surprise." He stepped inside, his eyes immediately scanning the living room as if taking inventory. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check on you. Lisa mentioned you seemed a little off when she called this morning." Off. Another carefully chosen word to suggest decline. "I'm perfectly fine. Would you like some coffee?" In the kitchen, as she prepared his coffee exactly the way he'd liked it since he was a teenager, David continued his assessment. "The house is looking good, Mom. You're keeping up with everything okay?" "Of course I am. Why wouldn't I be? No reason, it's a lot of house for one person. A lot of maintenance, a lot of responsibility." He accepted the coffee cup, and she noticed how his hands weren't quite steady either. "Have you thought about downsizing? Maybe something smaller, more manageable?" There it was, the same theme Lisa had introduced. Suggestions wrapped in concern, designed to make her question her own capabilities. "I love this house, David. Your father and I built our life here. I'm not ready to give that up." "I understand, but maybe it's not about what you want right now. Maybe it's about being practical. Planning ahead." He set down his cup and looked at her directly for the first time since arriving. "Mom, we need to talk about some things. Your future. Making sure you're protected." Protected from what? From whom? She wanted to ask, but instinct told her to remain calm, to gather information rather than reveal her suspicions. "What did you have in mind?" "Well, Lisa and I have been talking, and we think it might be good for you to meet with someone. A specialist who works with families in transition." Families in transition. The euphemisms were piling up, each one designed to obscure the reality of what they were planning. What kind of specialist? David's discomfort was obvious now. He couldn't meet her eyes, and his voice carried the same forced cheerfulness she'd noticed Sunday. Someone who helps with planning. Legal things. Making sure all your paperwork is in order, that kind of thing. legal planning, paperwork. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying precision. They wanted her to meet with someone who could evaluate her mental capacity, document any supposed decline, and provide professional justification for removing her autonomy. That's very thoughtful of you, but I have my own lawyer, my own financial advisor. Everything is quite well organized. I know, but this would be someone who specializes in situations like yours. What situation is that exactly? David's facade cracked slightly. Mom, you're 72 years old, living alone, managing significant assets. There are risks, vulnerabilities. We just want to make sure you're protected. There was that word again, protected. But as Zenaida looked at her son, really looked at him, she saw something that chilled her more than all the euphemisms and careful suggestions. She saw desperation. Not just financial desperation, though that was clearly part of it. She saw the desperation of someone who had convinced himself that what he was planning was justified, necessary, even loving. David, she said quietly, is there something you need to tell me? Something you're struggling with? For a moment, his mask slipped entirely. She saw her little boy, the one who used to confess his mistakes with tears in his eyes and absolute trust that she would help him fix whatever had gone wrong. But then the moment passed and the stranger wearing her son's face returned. I'm fine, Mom. We're all fine. We just want to make sure you are too. After he left, Zenaida stood in her empty house and felt the weight of absolute isolation. The people she loved most in the world, the people she had sacrificed for, supported through every crisis, loved unconditionally, were plotting against her. And they were doing it while convincing themselves it was for her own good. But as the initial wave of hurt and betrayal began to recede, something else took its place. Something Robert would have recognized immediately. The same steely determination that had built a business from nothing, that had navigated 40 years of marriage and motherhood, that had survived immigration and discrimination and every challenge life had thrown at her. They thought she was a helpless old woman, easy to manipulate and control. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. Zenaida Matthew was done being protected. It was time to become dangerous. The morning after David's visit, Zenaida sat at her kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold beside her and a yellow legal pad covered in careful notes. She had spent the sleepless hours between midnight and dawn, organizing everything she knew, everything she suspected, and everything she needed to discover. At the top of the page, in her precise handwriting, she had written, "Know your enemy." Robert had taught her that phrase during the early days of their catering business, when they were competing against established companies with deeper pockets and longer histories. Information is power, Zenaida, he used to say. Find out what they want, how they plan to get it, and what they're afraid of losing. Then you'll know how to win. She started with what Tommy had overheard, discussions about her inability to care for herself, mentions of making decisions for her, and Marcus's comment about time running out. Combined with yesterday's conversations with Lisa and David, a pattern was emerging. They were building a case for her incompetence while simultaneously creating urgency around the need to quote, protect her. But urgency suggested a deadline. What was driving their timeline? Zenaida reached for the cordless phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in months. Her old business partner, Carmen Rodriguez, answered on the second ring. Zenaida, how are you holding up, mi amor? I'm managing, Carmen. Listen, I need a favor, and I need you to keep it confidential. Of course. What do you need? I need someone to make some discreet inquiries about my son's financial situations, David's business ventures, Marcus's employment status. Can your nephew in the banking industry help with that? Carmen was quiet for a moment. Are you in some kind of trouble? I'm trying to make sure I don't end up in trouble. Can you help me or not? Give me 48 hours. I'll see what Roberto can find out without raising any flags. Next, Zenaida called her lawyer's office, only to discover that James Morrison, her attorney for the past 15 years, was out of town for 2 weeks. His assistant offered to schedule an appointment for when he returned, but 2 weeks felt like a lifetime, given the acceleration she was sensing in her family's plans. Is there someone else in the firm who could help with some estate planning questions? Zenaida asked. Mr. Chen could see you Thursday afternoon. He handles a lot of our elder law cases. Elder law. Even her lawyer's office was categorizing her by her age rather than her needs. But she made the appointment anyway. She needed to understand her legal vulnerabilities and options. With those calls made, Zenaida turned her attention to a more delicate task. She needed to gather evidence of their surveillance and planning without alerting them to her awareness. She started in Robert's study, this time looking not for what was there, but for what was missing. The folder where she'd found her bank statements was slightly disorganized, papers not quite in the order she'd left them. Someone had been through it recently, probably looking for additional financial information. She made a mental note to have her bank statements sent to a P.O. box instead of her home address. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. In the filing cabinet, she discovered that several documents were missing entirely. Insurance policies, investment portfolios, and most tellingly, the folder containing Robert's will and estate planning documents. Those disappearances weren't accidental. Someone was building a comprehensive picture of her assets. A sound from the kitchen made her freeze. Footsteps, the soft closing of a door. Someone was in her house. Zenaida moved carefully toward the kitchen, her heart pounding but her mind sharp. She found Lisa standing by the counter, holding a set of keys and wearing the kind of bright smile that had probably served her well in pharmaceutical sales. "Zenaida, I hope you don't mind. I used the spare key David gave me. I brought some groceries I thought you might need." David had given Lisa a key to her house. When? Why hadn't anyone asked her permission? Zenaida noted several bags on the counter, but her attention was drawn to the small notebook Lisa was sliding into her purse. "That's very thoughtful of you, dear. What were you writing in your notebook?" Lisa's smile flickered for just a moment. "Oh, just a shopping list for next time. I noticed you were low on a few things." A shopping list that required documenting the contents of Zenaida's refrigerator and pantry. More likely, Lisa had been cataloging evidence of poor self-care, expired food, or empty shelves that could support a narrative of declining capabilities. "How wonderful that you're so observant," Zenaida said, moving to examine the groceries. They were basics: bread, milk, eggs, but also items she already had. Lisa had either not bothered to check what Zenaida actually needed, or she was deliberately creating the appearance of someone who couldn't properly manage her own household. "I also took the liberty of organizing some of your medications," Lisa continued, gesturing toward the counter where Zenaida's pill organizer sat. "I noticed they seemed a bit mixed up." They hadn't been mixed up. Zenaida had organized them herself just 2 days ago. But now Lisa could claim she'd found evidence of medication confusion, another mark against Zenaida's competence. "Lisa, I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable of managing my own medications and groceries." "Of course you are. I just thought I could help. We all want to help." Lisa's voice carried that particular tone Zenaida was learning to recognize. Sweet on the surface, but with an underlying condescension that suggested the speaker knew better than the person they were addressing. After Lisa left, Zenaida examined everything her daughter-in-law had touched. The medication organizer had indeed been rearranged, creating the kind of random mix that could suggest confusion or memory problems. The groceries included duplicates of items already in her pantry, and Lisa had specifically noted the expiration dates on several items that were still perfectly good. It was systematic documentation disguised as helpful care. That afternoon, Tommy arrived for his usual after-school visit. Zenaida watched him more carefully now, noting how he glanced around nervously and stayed closer to her than usual. His normal chatter was subdued, and she could see the weight of secrets in his young shoulders. "Tommy, sweetie, has anyone asked you questions about me lately? About how I'm doing? Whether I seem confused about anything?" He nodded reluctantly. "Mom asked if you ever forgot my name or seemed lost in your own house. Uncle Marcus wanted to know if you ever left the stove on or couldn't find your car keys." They were coaching him, preparing him to be a witness to her supposed decline, but instead of the compliant responses they expected, Tommy was protecting her by sharing their questions. "What did you tell them?" "I told them you're the smartest person I know and you never forget anything important." His voice was fierce with loyalty, but she could see the stress the divided loyalties were causing him. "Tommy, I need you to know that no matter what happens, no matter what anyone says, you told me the truth when it mattered most. You're the bravest little boy I know." That evening, Carmen called back with information that confirmed Zenaida's worst fears. David's business was not just struggling, it was on the verge of bankruptcy. He owed significant money to investors who had expected returns that never materialized. Marcus's situation was even worse. He'd been terminated from his last job for financial irregularities, and Carmen's nephew had heard rumors about gambling debts to people who didn't accept late payments gracefully. "Zenaida," Carmen said carefully, "Roberto thinks Marcus might be in real danger if he doesn't come up with money soon. The kind of danger where people get hurt." Suddenly, Marcus's comment about time running out made terrible sense. This wasn't just about greed or opportunism. Marcus was desperate in a way that made him genuinely dangerous, and David was drowning in debt that threatened everything he'd worked for. They needed her money, and they needed it soon, which meant they would escalate their plans, move faster, take bigger risks. Zenaida looked around her quiet house, at the photos of family gatherings and the mementos of a life well lived, and realized she was living in enemy territory. The people she trusted most had become the people she needed to fear most. But she was no longer the unsuspecting target they believed her to be. She knew what they wanted, how they planned to get it, and what they were afraid of losing. Now it was time to turn that knowledge into power. The real battle was about to begin. Thursday afternoon found Zenaida sitting in the sterile waiting room of Morrison & Associates. Her hands folded calmly in her lap while her mind raced through the strategy she'd spent 2 sleepless nights perfecting. The younger attorney, David Chen, had been respectful but clearly puzzled by her request for preventive legal consultation regarding family dynamics and estate protection. She'd chosen her words carefully, avoiding any direct accusations while making it clear she needed to understand her vulnerabilities. "Mrs. Matthew," the receptionist called, "Mr. Chen will see you now." David Chen was younger than she'd expected, probably in his early 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the careful demeanor of someone who'd seen too many family disputes turn ugly. His office was modest but organized, law books lining the walls alongside certificates and a few family photos. "Mrs. Matthew, thank you for coming in. My assistant mentioned you had some concerns about estate planning, among other things." Zenaida settled into the chair across from his desk, noting how he seemed to be assessing her mental acuity, a habit, she realized, that probably came with handling elder law cases. "I'd like to understand the legal process for challenging someone's mental competency, particularly as it relates to guardianship proceedings." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Are you concerned about someone in your family?" "I'm concerned about someone challenging mine." The words hung in the air between them, and she watched understanding dawn in his expression. He'd clearly handled cases like this before, families fracturing over money, adult children seeking control over aging parents, the ugly intersection of love and greed that played out in courtrooms across the country. "I see. Can you tell me what's prompted this concern?" Zenaida chose her words carefully, presenting facts without emotional interpretation. The mysterious key to her house, the rearranged medications, the questions being asked of her grandson, the missing financial documents, the pattern of suggestions about her declining capabilities. Mr. Chen took notes as she spoke, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Mrs. Matthew, based on what you've described, it does sound like someone may be building a case for guardianship proceedings. The good news is that the bar for proving incompetence is quite high in this state. The bad news is that the process itself can be emotionally and financially devastating, even if you ultimately prevail. What would I need to prove to defend myself?" "Mental competency, primarily. The ability to understand the nature and consequences of your decisions, to manage your own affairs, to live independently. Usually this involves psychological evaluations, medical assessments, testimony from family and friends. And if someone has been documenting supposed evidence of decline, then you'll need stronger evidence of your competence. Medical records showing good health, financial records demonstrating sound judgment, testimony from credible witnesses about your mental acuity. He leaned forward. Mrs. Matthew, I have to ask, do you have anyone in your family you can trust? Anyone who would support you if this goes to court? The question hit her like a physical blow. Her entire family had been compromised except for an 8-year-old boy who shouldn't have to carry that burden. I'm not sure. Then we need to think strategically about building your support network. Friends, neighbors, professionals who interact with you regularly and can testify to your competence. As they discussed legal strategies and documentation, Zenaida found herself thinking about Dr. Helena Martinez. Robert's old friend had been calling more frequently since his death, always checking on how she was managing. Their relationship was built on decades of genuine friendship rather than family obligation, which made Helena potentially valuable as an objective witness, if she could be trusted. But that was also the problem. If Lisa was orchestrating this carefully, she might already be working to compromise Helena's perspective. After leaving the lawyer's office, Zenaida drove to the small cafe, where she'd arranged to meet Helena for coffee. Dr. Martinez was already seated at a corner table, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed what looked like patient files. Zenaida. Helena rose to embrace her, the warmth genuine and immediate. You look well. How are you managing? Some days better than others, Zenaida replied, settling into her chair and studying her old friend's face. Helena had the kind of professional composure that came from decades of listening to people's deepest problems. But there was something in her expression, a slight tension around her eyes, that suggested she might already know more about Zenaida's situation than she was letting on. They ordered coffee and spent a few minutes catching up on mutual friends and neighborhood news. But as their conversation settled into a comfortable rhythm, Helena's questions became more pointed. How are David and Marcus doing? It must be such a comfort to have family close by. They're both struggling with some challenges, Zenaida replied carefully. Financial pressures, you know how it is. Yes, Lisa mentioned they've been concerned about you. About whether you might need more support as you get older. There it was. Lisa had already been in contact with Helena, planting seeds of concern. Zenaida felt a chill of realization. This coffee meeting might not be the casual social visit she'd assumed. Helena might be here in a professional capacity, conducting an informal assessment. Did she? How interesting. I can't imagine why she would think that. Helena's expression remained neutral, but Zenaida caught the slight shift in her posture, the way her hands stilled on her coffee cup. Sometimes family members notice changes before the person themselves does. It's natural to be concerned about aging parents. Aging parents. The clinical terminology felt like a slap. Helena was speaking to her not as a friend, but as a psychiatrist, evaluating an elderly patient. Helena, are you here as my friend? Or as a doctor? The directness of the question seemed to catch Helena off guard. She set down her coffee cup and looked directly at Zenaida for the first time since they'd sat down. I'm here as your friend. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't concerned about some of the things Lisa has shared with me. Such as forgetfulness, confusion about daily tasks, some difficulties with decision-making. Helena's voice was gentle but professional. Zenaida, these things are normal parts of aging, but they can also indicate the need for additional support. Zenaida felt a surge of anger so pure it took her breath away. Lisa had been poisoning this relationship too, feeding Helena a carefully crafted narrative designed to support their case for guardianship. But underneath the anger was something more dangerous, clarity. Helena, I want you to listen to me very carefully. My memory is perfect. I manage my own household, my own finances, my own medical care. I drive safely, cook regularly, and maintain an active social life. Whatever Lisa has told you is either a misunderstanding or a deliberate misrepresentation. Helena's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing something that might have been doubt. Zenaida, families don't usually what? Lie about their elderly relatives for financial gain? Oh, my dear friend, I think you'll find that families do exactly that more often than you'd like to believe. The words hung between them, and Zenaida watched Helena process the implications. As a psychiatrist, Helena would be familiar with family manipulation, financial abuse of the elderly, the ways that love and greed could twist into something unrecognizable. Are you saying that David and Lisa are lying about your condition? I'm saying that David is drowning in debt, and Marcus is in danger from gambling creditors, and they see my assets as their salvation. I'm saying that Lisa has been systematically documenting supposed evidence of my decline, while positioning herself as my caregiver. I'm saying that someone gave her a key to my house without my permission, so she could rearrange my medications and inventory my groceries. Helena was quiet for a long moment, her professional training warring with decades of friendship. Those are serious accusations. Yes, they are, and I can prove every one of them. Zenaida, if what you're saying is true, Helena, you've known me for 25 years. Have I ever been prone to paranoia or delusions? Have I ever made wild accusations or lost touch with reality? No, of course not. Then trust your own judgment rather than secondhand reports from people who have something to gain from my supposed incompetence. Helena removed her glasses and rubbed her temples, suddenly looking older and more tired. God, Zenaida, I hope you're wrong. But some of the things Lisa described, they seemed so specific, so concerned. Specific because they were carefully crafted. Concerned because she needed to establish credibility for when she tries to use your professional opinion to support their case. The realization hit Helena like a physical blow. Zenaida could see it in her face. The understanding that she had been manipulated, used as an unwitting tool in someone else's scheme. As a psychiatrist, Helena would find the professional violation particularly galling. She asked me to observe you informally during family gatherings, Helena said quietly, to note any signs of cognitive decline. And will you? Helena looked at her friend, really looked at her, and seemed to see clearly for the first time since they'd sat down. What I'll observe is a 72-year-old woman who is sharp, articulate, and fully aware of her circumstances. What I'll note is that any supposed evidence of decline appears to be fabricated by family members with obvious financial motives. Relief flooded through Zenaida, but she kept her expression calm. Will you help me? What do you need? I need someone credible to document my actual mental state. I need a witness to their manipulation. And I need someone to testify on my behalf if this goes to court. Helena nodded slowly. You have all three. As they prepared to leave the cafe, Helena placed a gentle hand on Zenaida's arm. I'm sorry I doubted you. I should have known better. You were being manipulated by someone very skilled at manipulation. The important thing is that you see the truth now. Walking to her car, Zenaida felt the first real hope she'd experienced since Tommy's whispered warning. She had an ally now, someone with professional credentials who could counter whatever narrative Lisa and her family tried to construct. But as she drove home through the quiet streets of Millbrook, she also felt the weight of escalation. By refusing to play the role of declining elderly woman, by challenging their narrative and building her own support network, she was forcing them to move more aggressively. The careful subtlety of their initial approach would give way to more direct tactics. And given Marcus's desperation and Lisa's investment in the plan, those tactics might become dangerous. She thought about Tommy, caught in the middle of this war between the adults he loved. She thought about David, whose weakness was being exploited by his wife and brother. She thought about the family photos lining her hallway, all those years of love that had somehow led to this moment of betrayal. Tomorrow, she would begin the most difficult phase of her defense. Tomorrow, she would start fighting back in earnest. But tonight, she would mourn the family she thought she had, before embracing the reality of the family she actually faced. The call came at 7:30 Friday morning, just as Zenaida was finishing her coffee and reviewing the notes she'd been keeping about her family's activities. Lisa's voice carried an unusual urgency that immediately put Zenaida on high alert. Zenaida, I'm so glad I caught you. David and I have been talking, and we really think it's time for that family meeting we discussed. You know, about your future planning. They hadn't discussed any such meeting, but Lisa was speaking as if it were a previously agreed-upon arrangement, another example of the gaslighting technique she'd perfected. "I don't recall us discussing a family meeting, dear. Oh, when David visited earlier this week. He mentioned that you seemed open to the idea of getting some professional guidance." Lisa's voice carried that practiced sweetness that Zenaida now recognized as manipulation. "We've arranged for Dr. Martinez to join us this afternoon, just informally, to help facilitate the conversation." Zenaida's blood ran cold. They were moving to the endgame, arranging for Helena to witness whatever performance they had planned. Except they didn't know that Helena was now aware of their scheme. "That seems rather sudden. I'm not sure I'm prepared for." "Oh, don't worry about preparing anything. This is just a casual conversation between family members who love you." Dr. Martinez thought it would be helpful to have a neutral party present, given the importance of the decisions we need to discuss. Decisions we need to discuss. The phrasing was deliberate, inclusive language that suggested collective decision-making while subtly implying that Zenaida's individual autonomy was no longer a given. "What time did you have in mind?" 2 o'clock? That way Tommy can be here too. We thought it would be good for him to understand what's happening with the family." Using Tommy as both witness and emotional leverage. Zenaida felt a surge of protective anger but kept her voice level. "I'll see you at 2. After hanging up, she immediately called Helena, who answered on the first ring. "I was wondering if you'd heard from them," Helena said without preamble. "Lisa called me an hour ago, asking me to facilitate a family meeting about your care planning. She seemed to think you'd already agreed to some kind of evaluation." "I haven't agreed to anything. This is the intervention we discussed. They're going to present their fabricated evidence and try to pressure me into signing over power of attorney or agreeing to guardianship proceedings. What do you want me to do?" Zenaida had spent the sleepless hours between midnight and dawn thinking about exactly this scenario. "I want you to come. I want you to observe everything they do and say. But I also want you to be prepared for what you're going to see. They're going to try to make me appear confused, forgetful, or incompetent." "How?" "I'm not sure yet, but they've been practicing this for weeks, setting up situations where they can claim I'm declining. Today is their performance." At 1:55, Zenaida sat in her living room, every sense heightened, waiting for her family to arrive. She dressed carefully in a navy blue dress that conveyed both dignity and competence, and she'd arranged the room to subtly showcase her independence. Recent mail sorted and filed, bills paid and organized, her reading glasses, and the morning crossword puzzle completed in her neat handwriting visible on the side table. They arrived together, which told her they'd coordinated beforehand. David looked pale and nervous, avoiding her eyes as he mumbled a greeting. Lisa was perfectly groomed and carried a leather portfolio that undoubtedly contained her documented quote, evidence. Marcus wore his most charming smile, but she could see the desperation lurking beneath it. Tommy bounded in ahead of them, wrapping his arms around her waist in his usual exuberant greeting, but she felt the tension in his small body. He knew something was wrong. Helena arrived precisely at 2, her professional demeanor in place, but her eyes alert and watchful. She greeted everyone warmly, but Zenaida caught the subtle way she positioned herself to observe the family dynamics. "Well," Lisa began once everyone was seated, "I think we should start by acknowledging how much we all love Zenaida and want what's best for her." The preamble was perfectly crafted. Who could argue with love and concern? But it also established the framework they wanted. A group of caring family members making decisions about someone who needed their protection. "We've all noticed some changes lately," David added reluctantly, his voice strained. "Little things that might not seem important individually, but together they're concerning." "What kind of changes?" Helena asked, her voice carefully neutral. Lisa opened her portfolio with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. "Well, there have been several incidents of forgetfulness. Last week I found her medications completely mixed up and she seemed confused about what day it was." "I wasn't confused about anything," Zenaida said calmly. "You rearranged my medications after I'd organized them myself." "Oh, sweetheart, I know you think you remember it that way," Lisa replied with patronizing gentleness. "But that's exactly what we're concerned about. These little memory gaps. Memory gaps." Another carefully chosen phrase designed to pathologize normal disagreement. Zenaida felt the trap closing around her but forced herself to remain calm. Marcus leaned forward with an expression of earnest concern. There have been financial issues too. Some questionable decisions, bills not being paid on time. Which bills? Zenaida asked sharply. Marcus fumbled for a moment, clearly not having expected to be challenged on specifics. Well, there was that notice from the electric company. There was no notice from the electric company. My bills are paid automatically, and I have confirmation of every payment. Zenaida turned to Helena. I can show you my bank statements and payment records if you'd like to verify this. She watched Lisa's jaw tighten, almost imperceptibly. They'd expected her to be defensive or confused, not to offer concrete evidence that contradicted their claims. The point isn't any single incident, Lisa said, recovering quickly. It's the pattern, the way small confusions are becoming more frequent. Give me a specific example of a confusion. Well, last Sunday you seemed to forget that we discussed having someone come help with household management. We never discussed that. You suggested it during a phone call, and I declined. See? This is exactly what we mean. David interjected, his guilt making him sound more aggressive than persuasive. You're becoming argumentative about things that definitely happened. Helena had been taking notes, and Zenaida could see her documenting not just what was being said, but how it was being said. The coordinated nature of their presentation. The way they dismissed Zenaida's clear recollections. The patronizing tone they used when addressing her directly. I'd like to understand the timeline here, Helena said carefully. When did these concerns first arise? Lisa and David exchanged glances, a moment of silent communication that Helena clearly noticed. It's been gradual, Lisa said. Over the past few months, maybe longer. But you're just bringing it up now? We didn't want to upset her unnecessarily, Marcus said. We hoped it might improve on its own. That's interesting, Zenaida said quietly. Because 2 days ago, David, you told me you were fine when I asked if there was something you needed to tell me. And Lisa, when you called Tuesday, you claimed to be worried about my health, but you didn't mention any of these supposed incidents of confusion. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. She just demonstrated exactly the kind of clear memory and logical thinking they claim she lacked. Sometimes people with early-stage cognitive decline can seem perfectly normal in structured conversations, Lisa said, but her voice had lost some of its confident sweetness. And sometimes, Helena said quietly, families mistake their own anxiety about aging for actual evidence of decline. The battle lines were now clearly drawn. Lisa's carefully constructed narrative was crumbling under scrutiny, and Helena's professional observation was documenting their manipulation in real time. But Zenaida could see the desperation growing in Marcus's eyes, the way David was beginning to panic as their plan fell apart. A cornered animal was most dangerous, and she suddenly realized that exposing their deception might push them toward more direct and dangerous tactics. Tommy had been sitting quietly through the adult conversation, but now he spoke up in his clear young voice. Why are you all saying Grandma's confused? She helps me with my math homework every day, and she never gets the problems wrong. Out of the mouths of babes. The most damning testimony of all came from the 8-year-old they'd planned to use as a witness to her decline. The room fell silent after Tommy's innocent declaration, his words hanging in the air like an accusation. Zenaida watched the careful facade her family had constructed crumble in real time. Lisa's composed expression fractured into something harder and more desperate. David's nervous energy transformed into visible panic. But it was Marcus who worried her most. His charming mask had slipped entirely, revealing the raw desperation of a man with nothing left to lose. Tommy doesn't understand the complexity of the situation, Lisa said, her voice tight with barely controlled frustration. Children don't see the subtle signs that adults recognize. Actually, Helena interjected, her professional authority cutting through the tension. Children are often the most reliable observers of cognitive function in elderly relatives. They're not biased by preconceptions or agenda. The word agenda hit like a slap. Helena was no longer maintaining professional neutrality. She was actively challenging their narrative. Marcus shot to his feet with sudden violence, startling everyone in the room. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, his composure finally cracking completely. "We're trying to help her, and she's turning it into some kind of conspiracy theory. Mom, you need to face reality. You're not getting any younger, and we're the ones who'll be responsible when something goes wrong." "Responsible for what, exactly?" Zenaida asked, her voice deadly calm. "For everything. Your medical bills when you fall and break a hip, your care when you can't manage alone anymore, the lawsuits when you forget to turn off the stove and burn down the neighborhood." His voice was rising, the careful script abandoned for raw emotion. "We're drowning, Mom. David's business is finished, and I've got people breathing down my neck who don't accept excuses. We need—" "Marcus," David hissed, grabbing his brother's arm. "Shut up." But it was too late. The truth had spilled out in a torrent of desperation and self-justification. Marcus jerked away from David's grip, his face flushed with anger, and something that looked like relief at finally dropping the pretense. "No, I'm done with this charade. She knows what we're doing anyway. Look at her face. She's been playing us just as much as we've been playing her." He turned to face Zenaida directly, his expression a mixture of anger and desperate pleading. "Mom, I need $200,000. Not eventually, not when you die, now. If I don't get it in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to disappear permanently and not by choice." Tommy had pressed himself against Zenaida's side, his young face pale with fear at the adult emotions exploding around him. She wrapped her arm around her grandson protectively, feeling his small body trembling. "Are you threatening me, Marcus? I'm trying to save my life. And if that means having you declared incompetent so David can access your accounts, then that's what we'll do. We tried to do this the nice way, but you're being stubborn and selfish." Helena was writing furiously now, documenting everything for what Zenaida realized would likely become legal evidence. Lisa was staring at Marcus with horror, clearly understanding that he'd just destroyed any possibility of maintaining their carefully constructed narrative. "Marcus, you need to calm down," Lisa said urgently. "This isn't helping anyone." "Helping?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "You're the one who came up with this whole elaborate scheme, and now you're worried about appearances? It's too late for that, Lisa, she knows. Dr. Martinez knows. We're past subtle manipulation now." David stood up slowly, his face gray with shame and fear. "Marcus, you need to leave. Now. I'm not going anywhere until we settle this. Mom, you're going to sign power of attorney papers or we're going to court. Either way, I'm getting access to that money." The naked threat hung in the air like a physical presence. Zenaida felt Tommy's grip tighten on her arm and realized that her grandson was witnessing the complete destruction of his family's facade. The adults he trusted were revealing themselves to be capable of financial coercion and emotional manipulation. "Get out of my house," Zenaida said quietly, but her voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades making decisions and having them obeyed. "I don't think so. We're going to finish this conversation." Helena closed her notebook and stood up, her professional calm somehow more intimidating than Marcus's open aggression. "Mr. Matthew, you've just threatened an elderly woman in front of witnesses and admitted to conspiracy to commit financial fraud. I strongly suggest you leave immediately before this situation escalates further." "Who's going to make me? The old lady? The shrink? My gutless brother?" The contempt in his voice was absolute. But Zenaida could see the calculation behind it too. Marcus was assessing the room, looking for leverage, for some way to regain control of a situation that had spiraled beyond his grasp. It was then that Tommy did something that surprised everyone. He stood up from beside his grandmother and walked directly to his uncle, his young face set with determination that reminded Zenaida powerfully of Robert in his most resolute moments. "Uncle Marcus, you're scaring Grandma. And you're scaring me. Please leave." The simple dignity of the child's request seemed to cut through Marcus's desperation more effectively than any adult intervention. For a moment, his expression softened, and Zenaida saw a glimpse of the brother she remembered. The one who used to read bedtime stories to David's son with infinite patience. But then his face hardened again, and she realized with growing alarm that Marcus had moved past rational thought into pure survival mode. "Tommy, go to your room," he said quietly. "This isn't your house," Tommy replied with 8-year-old logic. "You can't tell me what to do here." Marcus's hand shot out and grabbed Tommy's arm, not roughly, but with clear intent to remove the child from the equation. "I said, go to your room. Take your hands off my grandson." Zenaida's voice carried a steel that none of them had heard before, and for the first time since the confrontation began, Marcus looked genuinely uncertain. The line had been crossed. Whatever family loyalty or pretense of concern had remained was shattered the moment Marcus put his hands on Tommy. They all understood that this was no longer about money or guardianship or family dynamics. This was about something far more dangerous. The moment Marcus's hand closed around Tommy's arm, something fundamental shifted in the room. Zenaida felt a cold clarity settle over her, the same focused calm she'd experienced during the most critical business negotiations of her career. But this wasn't about contracts or profit margins. This was about protecting her grandson from people who had revealed themselves to be genuinely dangerous. "Marcus," she said quietly, rising from her chair with deliberate slowness, "you have exactly 5 seconds to take your hands off my grandson before I call the police." "You won't call anyone," Marcus replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "You wouldn't want to destroy the family over money. I'm not the one destroying this family." Helena was already reaching for her phone when Zenaida held up a hand to stop her. She walked to her purse, which sat on the side table exactly where she'd placed it before the meeting began, and withdrew, not her phone, but a small digital recorder. "I've been recording this entire conversation," she announced calmly. "Every threat, every admission, every attempt at coercion. Marcus, you've just confessed to conspiracy, financial fraud, and now you've physically restrained a child in front of witnesses." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus released Tommy's arm as if it had burned him, his face cycling through shock, anger, and growing panic. "You've been recording us?" Lisa's voice was barely above a whisper. "For weeks. Every phone call, every visit, every carefully staged incident designed to make me appear incompetent." Zenaida set the recorder on the coffee table, where everyone could see it. "I have documentation of your unauthorized access to my financial records, Marcus. Evidence of your gambling debts and the threats you've received from creditors. Proof that Lisa has been rearranging my medications and inventorying my home without permission." David sank back into his chair, all the fight gone out of him. "Mom, how did I know? Because I'm not the declining old woman you needed me to be. I'm the same person who built a business from nothing and managed this family's affairs for 4 decades. She looked at each of them in turn. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice my own children plotting against me?" Marcus was backing toward the door now, his desperation replaced by something that might have been fear. "This doesn't change anything. I still need that money." "Then you should have asked for it honestly instead of trying to steal it through legal manipulation. You would have said no. You'll never know now, will you?" Helena stood up, her professional documentation complete. "Mrs. Matthew, I think it's time to contact the authorities. What we've witnessed here today constitutes elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and now assault on a minor." "No," Zenaida said firmly. "Not yet." Everyone stared at her in confusion, but she had one final card to play, the one she'd been holding in reserve since the day Robert died. "Marcus, David, Lisa, you've all forgotten something very important about my late husband. Robert wasn't just a successful businessman. He was a very careful man who planned for every contingency." She walked to Robert's old desk and retrieved a sealed envelope from the locked drawer, including the possibility that his death might bring out the worst in people he loved. She opened the envelope and withdrew a legal document that made David's face go white. 2 years ago, when Robert's health was declining, we restructured everything. The house, the investments, the business assets, all of it went into an irrevocable trust with very specific conditions for inheritance. Her voice was steady, almost conversational. "The trust only passes to our children if they demonstrate, and I quote, moral fitness and genuine concern for the family's well-being, rather than personal financial gain." Marcus grabbed the document from her hands, scanning it frantically. This can't be legal. It's completely legal. And every action you've taken in the past month has been documented and evaluated by the Trust's Oversight Committee. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. They had been so focused on proving her incompetent that they'd never considered the possibility that she had been testing theirs. "You've been watching us," Lisa breathed. "This whole time you've been watching us. Every phone call with my lawyer, every visit with financial advisors, every document you thought you were stealing." Zenaida's smile was razor-sharp. "You failed the test spectacularly." The silence that followed Zenaida's revelations stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Marcus stared at the trust document in his hands, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and dawning horror as he realized the full scope of what had just been revealed. Lisa sat frozen, her careful composure finally shattered completely. David looked like a man watching his entire world collapse in slow motion. "You planned this," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "From the beginning, you planned this. Robert and I planned for the possibility that grief and financial pressure might compromise your judgment. We hoped we'd never need to use these safeguards." Zenaida's voice carried genuine sadness beneath its steely resolve. "You've proven that our caution was justified." Helena was taking notes again, documenting this final revelation, but her expression showed something that might have been admiration for the careful strategic thinking that had outmaneuvered a coordinated family conspiracy. Marcus crumpled the document in his fist, his desperation transforming into something darker. "This doesn't solve my problem. Those people I owe money to don't care about trust conditions or moral fitness. They want payment, and they want it now." "Then you should have thought about that before you decided to try to steal from your mother," Helena said quietly. "I wasn't stealing. This money should be mine anyway. She's got more than she could ever spend, and I'm about to disappear permanently because of gambling debts." Marcus's voice cracked with frustration. "Do you know what happens to people who don't pay the kind of debts I owe? They don't just lose money, they lose fingers. They lose legs. Sometimes they just lose their lives." Tommy had pressed himself against Zenaida's side again, his young mind struggling to process the adult realities being discussed around him. The innocent trust he'd once had in his family was being systematically destroyed, and Zenaida felt her heart break for what this was costing him. "Marcus," she said gently, "if you had come to me 2 months ago and honestly explained your situation, asked for help with your gambling addiction, acknowledged that you'd made terrible mistakes, I would have helped you. Would you?" His laugh was bitter. "Or would you have given me some lecture about responsibility and consequences?" "I would have helped you because I love you. Because despite everything you've done, you're still my son." The simple statement seemed to hit Marcus like a physical blow. For a moment, his facade cracked completely, and she saw the frightened boy he'd once been, the one who used to crawl into her bed during thunderstorms. "It's too late for that now," he whispered. "It doesn't have to be." David finally looked up from his hands, his face streaked with tears he didn't seem to realize he was shedding. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I never wanted any of this. I was just so scared, so desperate. The business debts, the investors threatening lawsuits. I thought if I could just access some of your assets temporarily, I could save everything. And Lisa convinced you that having me declared incompetent was the only way?" David's silence was answer enough. Lisa, who had been sitting in stunned silence since the trust revelation, finally found her voice. "This is all very touching," she said, her tone sharp with barely controlled fury. "But it doesn't change the practical realities we're facing. David's business is still failing. Marcus still owes money to dangerous people. And now you've made sure that none of us will inherit anything. The trust conditions can be modified based on demonstrated change in behavior," Zenaida replied. "Redemption is possible, but it requires genuine accountability and commitment to change." "What kind of accountability?" David asked quietly. Helena looked up from her notes. "From a legal standpoint, what we've witnessed today constitutes multiple crimes. Elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, financial exploitation. Mrs. Matthew would be well within her rights to press charges. Marcus went pale. Criminal charges would make the gambling debts irrelevant. I'd be dead before I got out of jail. Or, Zenaida said carefully, we could handle this as a family matter. With conditions. The room held its breath as she outlined what those conditions would look like. Marcus would enter residential treatment for gambling addiction, with all expenses paid from the trust. David would undergo financial counseling and work with a court-appointed advisor to restructure his business debts. Both would be required to attend family therapy and make formal, legal acknowledgement of their attempted financial exploitation. And Lisa? David asked quietly. Zenaida looked at her daughter-in-law, seeing clearly for the first time the calculating ambition that had driven this entire conspiracy. Lisa planned and orchestrated this scheme. She manipulated all of you, documented false evidence, and attempted to use professional relationships to support her fraud. I don't see a path to redemption for someone who shows no remorse for their actions. You can't just cut me out, Lisa protested. I'm Tommy's mother. I have rights. You have the rights that family court determines you have after they review the evidence of your attempt to defraud an elderly relative. Helena's voice was professional, but implacable. Child custody determinations take into account a parent's demonstrated moral character and decision-making capabilities. The implications hit Lisa like a slap. Not only had she lost access to Zenaida's money, but she might lose custody of her son as well. Tommy, who had been listening to the adult conversation with the serious attention of a child trying to understand a world that had suddenly become very complicated, finally spoke up. Grandma, does this mean Mom and Dad are getting divorced? The innocent question cut through all the legal and financial maneuvering to the heart of what this was really about, a family being torn apart by greed and desperation, with a child caught in the middle. I think, Zenaida said gently, that your parents need to figure out what kind of people they want to be before they can figure out what kind of family you're going to have. David reached for his son, pulling Tommy into a hug that seemed to encompass all his guilt and love and desperate hope for forgiveness. Tommy, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you had to see this, had to hear these things. Daddy made some very bad choices, but I'm going to fix them. Are you going to stop trying to hurt Grandma? Yes, buddy. I'm going to stop trying to hurt Grandma. Marcus was staring out the window, his shoulders slumped in defeat. What about the people I owe money to? Treatment programs don't make gambling debts disappear. Leave that to me, Zenaida said quietly. But Marcus, this is your last chance. If you gamble again, if you betray this family's trust again, if you put any of us in danger again, you're on your own. As the family began to disperse, each carrying the weight of consequences and the fragile possibility of redemption, Zenaida held Tommy close and tried to process what the afternoon had cost all of them. She had won the battle for her independence and her assets, but the war had extracted a price that would take years to fully understand. 6 months later, Zenaida sat in the passenger seat of Dr. Martinez's car as they pulled into the parking lot of Serenity Hills Treatment Center. The autumn air was crisp with the promise of winter, and the rehabilitation facility looked peaceful, nestled among the golden maple trees that lined the drive. This was her third visit to see Marcus since he'd entered the residential gambling addiction program, and each visit had been a careful dance of hope and wariness. How are you feeling about today? Helena asked, turning off the engine and studying her friend's face with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent decades reading people's emotional states. Cautiously optimistic, Zenaida replied, straightening her jacket. Last month he seemed genuinely engaged with the program, but I've learned not to trust surface appearances when it comes to addiction. They walked through the facility's welcoming lobby, past walls decorated with artwork created by residents, and inspirational quotes about recovery and second chances. The irony wasn't lost on Zenaida that her son was learning to rebuild his life in a place that felt more nurturing than threatening, while she had spent months learning to navigate the wreckage of family relationships that might never fully heal. Marcus was waiting for them in the family therapy room, and Zenaida felt the familiar mixture of love and grief that had defined their interactions since the confrontation. He looked healthier than he had in years. The desperate hollowness had left his eyes, and he'd gained back some of the weight that gambling stress had stripped away. But there was something else in his expression now, a humility that was both heartening and heartbreaking. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly, rising to embrace her. The hug was careful, respectful, nothing like the careless affection of their old relationship, but perhaps more honest for its restraint. "Hello, sweetheart. You look well." "I feel clearer than I have in years. Scary, but clear." Marcus gestured for them to sit in the comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. "Dr. Reeves says clarity is the hardest part of recovery because you have to face everything you tried to escape through gambling." Dr. Reeves, Marcus's addiction counselor, joined them a few minutes later. She was a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and the kind of calm presence that suggested she'd guided many families through similar conversations. "Mrs. Matthew, Dr. Martinez, thank you for coming. Marcus has been doing excellent work in individual therapy, and he's asked to share some of his progress with you today." Marcus shifted in his chair, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I've been working through the steps of the program, and I'm at the point where I need to make amends. Not just apologize, but really understand how my actions affected other people." "Tell us what you've learned," Helena said gently. "I've learned that gambling wasn't just about money or excitement. It was about avoiding reality. Every bet I placed was a way to postpone dealing with my failures, my disappointments, the gap between who I thought I should be and who I actually was." His voice was steady but thick with emotion. "And when the debts got too big to ignore, when reality forced itself on me anyway, I tried to make you pay the price for my avoidance." Zenaida felt tears prick her eyes but maintained her composure. These conversations required careful emotional navigation. Too much forgiveness too quickly could undermine his recovery, but complete coldness would destroy any possibility of rebuilding their relationship. "How do you understand what you put me through?" she asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. "You lost your son. Not physically, not permanently, I hope. But the son you raised and loved and trusted. I became someone who was willing to steal from you, manipulate you, have you declared mentally incompetent, all to avoid facing the consequences of my own choices." He looked directly at her for the first time since they'd sat down. "I betrayed everything you taught me about family, about integrity, about taking responsibility for my mistakes." "And Tommy? How do you understand what you put your nephew through?" This question seemed to hit Marcus the hardest. His composure cracked, and she saw the genuine anguish that guilt therapy had helped him access. "I made a child choose between loyalty to his parents and protection of his grandmother. I put him in the middle of an adult conflict that should never have involved him. And when things went wrong, I grabbed him, used him as leverage." His voice broke. "I became someone a child should be afraid of." Dr. Reeves intervened gently. "Marcus, tell your mother about the letter project." Marcus reached into the folder beside his chair and withdrew several handwritten pages. "I've been writing letters. To you, to David, to Tommy, to Dr. Martinez. Not to send, but to work through my understanding of how my actions affected each of you. Dr. Reeves says writing helps clarify the emotional reality of what happened. Would you like to share part of what you wrote to me?" Marcus unfolded one of the pages, his hands trembling slightly. "I wrote, I turned my mother into an enemy because I couldn't face being my own enemy. I made her the obstacle to my salvation, instead of acknowledging that I was the only obstacle that mattered. I tried to steal her independence because I had already stolen my own through gambling. I wanted to make her pay for my weakness, and I convinced myself it was love, when it was really just cowardice." The raw honesty of his words filled the room with a heavy silence. Zenaida had to swallow hard before she could speak. "Do you believe you can change, Marcus? Really change, not just until the crisis passes?" "I don't know," he said, and the honesty of that admission carried more weight than any promise could have. "I know I want to change. I know I never want to be the person who grabbed Tommy's arm again, or who looked at his mother's assets like they were his salvation. But addiction counselors say wanting isn't enough. You have to build new patterns, new ways of handling stress and disappointment." Dr. Reeves nodded approvingly. "Marcus has made excellent progress, But we're also realistic about the challenges ahead. Gambling addiction has one of the highest relapse rates of any addiction. Recovery is a daily choice, not a one-time decision. They talked for another hour about Marcus's treatment plan, his progress in therapy, and the careful steps that would need to be taken when he eventually returned to the outside world. There would be financial monitoring, continued counseling, and strict boundaries around his access to money or credit. As the visit concluded, Marcus walked them to the parking lot. The autumn air carried the scent of wood smoke from somewhere in the distance, and Zenaida found herself thinking about cycles, seasons ending and beginning, relationships breaking down and potentially rebuilding. "Mom," Marcus said as they reached Helena's car, "I know you don't owe me forgiveness. I know I might never earn it back completely. But I want you to know that even if you never trust me again, even if our relationship never recovers, this process has been worth it. I'm becoming someone I can live with, and that hasn't been true for years." Zenaida studied her son's face, looking for signs of manipulation or performance. But what she saw was simply honesty. Painful, humble, fragile honesty. "I love you, Marcus. I never stopped loving you, even when I couldn't trust you. Love and trust are different things, and we'll have to rebuild trust slowly." But the love was never in question. The drive home was quiet, both women processing the emotional weight of the visit. Finally, Helena spoke. "How do you feel about his progress?" "Hopeful. Carefully hopeful. He's doing the work, facing the reality of what he did instead of making excuses or minimizing it." Zenaida gazed out the window at the changing leaves. But addiction recovery is measured in years, not months. And trust, once broken this completely, may take even longer to rebuild. When they arrived at Zenaida's house, David's car was already in the driveway. He was waiting on the front porch with Tommy, both of them bundled in jackets against the autumn chill. The scene was so reminiscent of happier times that Zenaida felt a pang of loss for the family they used to be. "Grandma Z." Tommy bounded down the steps to hug her, his enthusiasm unchanged despite everything that had happened. At 9 years old now, he seemed to have developed a remarkable resilience that both amazed and worried her. "How was school today, sweetheart?" "Good. I got an A on my math test. Dad helped me study last night." David approached more cautiously, the easy confidence he'd once possessed around his mother, replaced by careful respect and lingering guilt. "Hi, Mom. I hope it's okay that we stopped by. Tommy wanted to show you his test score." "Of course it's okay. You're always welcome here." The words were true, but they carried different weight than they once had. David was welcome, but not with the unconscious assumption of belonging that had once defined family relationships. He was welcome as someone earning his way back into trust, rather than someone who'd never lost it. They went inside, and David helped Tommy with his after-school snack while Zenaida put on coffee. The domestic normalcy felt both precious and fragile, a conscious effort by everyone to create something resembling the family they'd once been. "How is the financial counseling going?" Zenaida asked as David joined her in the kitchen. "Hard, really hard, but helpful." David's voice carried none of his old defensive patterns. "I'm learning to face the numbers instead of hiding from them, to plan instead of just hoping things will work out. The court-appointed advisor is tough, but she's helping me understand how I got so deep in debt." "And how did you get so deep in debt?" David was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee with unnecessary focus. "I kept thinking the next business venture would be the one that paid off. I kept borrowing against future success instead of acknowledging present failures. And I was too proud to ask for help until it was almost too late." Too proud or too afraid? Both, I think. I didn't want you to see me as a failure. Zenaida set down her coffee cup and looked at her son directly. "David, I've never seen you as a failure. Disappointed in your choices sometimes, worried about your judgment occasionally, but never a failure. You're a good father, a hard worker, and someone who's capable of learning from mistakes. But I needed you to ask for help honestly, instead of trying to take it through deception." Tommy wandered into the kitchen, math homework in hand. "Grandma, can you check my division problems?" "Of course, sweetheart." As she reviewed Tommy's careful work, praising his progress and gently correcting a few errors, Zenaida was struck by the contrast between this simple interaction and the complex emotional work required to rebuild relationships with the adults in her family. With Tommy, love was uncomplicated. He had been honest about the adult conspiracy he'd witnessed, he'd chosen to protect her when protection was needed, and their bond had emerged stronger for having been tested. But with David and Marcus, love had to coexist with wariness, forgiveness had to be balanced with accountability, and hope had to be tempered with realism. "Mom," David said quietly as Tommy worked on his homework at the kitchen table, "I know this is probably too early to ask, but I wonder if you've thought about what happens next. With the family, I mean. With us." Zenaida considered the question carefully. In the months since the confrontation, she'd restructured her entire life around self-protection and careful boundaries. She'd changed locks, modified her will again, set up new financial monitoring systems. She'd learned to live with the reality that her own children had been willing to manipulate and deceive her for money. But she'd also watched David consistently attend his counseling sessions, seen him working to rebuild his relationship with Tommy, witnessed his genuine efforts to take responsibility for his choices. And Marcus's progress, though more fragile and uncertain, suggested the possibility of real change. "I think," she said finally, "that we're building something new. Not the family we used to be, that's gone, and maybe it needed to go because it was built on assumptions that turned out to be false. But maybe we can build something more honest, more resilient. What would that look like? It would look like continued therapy for you and Marcus. It would look like transparency about financial decisions and family concerns. It would look like earning trust through consistent actions over time, rather than expecting it as a birthright." She paused, watching Tommy erase and rewrite a problem he'd gotten wrong. "And it would look like accepting that some relationships can't be rebuilt, that Lisa chose to prioritize her own interests over family integrity, and those choices have consequences." David nodded sadly. The divorce proceedings had been finalized the previous month, with David receiving primary custody of Tommy after Lisa's attempted financial fraud became part of the court record. Lisa maintained supervised visitation rights, but her role in the family had been fundamentally altered by her choices. "I still can't believe she was willing to go so far," David said. "People reveal who they really are under pressure. Lisa revealed that she saw me as an obstacle to her financial security, rather than as family deserving of respect and honesty. That's not something I can forgive or forget, even if I wanted to." As the afternoon wore on, the three generations worked together on homework and household tasks, with the careful courtesy of people rebuilding trust. There were moments of genuine warmth, Tommy's laughter at one of David's silly jokes, the comfortable silence as they worked together in the kitchen, but also moments of awkwardness as old patterns bumped against new boundaries. When David and Tommy prepared to leave, the goodbye felt significant in its ordinariness. A hug from Tommy, a careful embrace from David, plans to see each other again soon. It was the kind of ending to a family visit that would have been unremarkable 6 months earlier, but felt like a small miracle now. After they left, Zenaida sat in her quiet house and reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. She had lost the family she thought she had, but she was slowly gaining the family she actually had. Flawed, damaged, but potentially more honest and stronger for having survived the testing. The path to redemption, she was learning, was neither straight nor guaranteed. But it was possible, and that possibility was worth the careful, difficult work of rebuilding love on a foundation of truth rather than assumption. 1 year after Tommy's whispered warning changed everything, Zenaida Matthews stood in her kitchen on a crisp October morning, preparing for what would be both an ending and a beginning. Today was her 73rd birthday, but more importantly, it marked the first genuine family celebration since the confrontation that had torn apart everything she thought she knew about the people she loved most. The morning light filtered through the windows she'd had security enhanced after the crisis, casting familiar patterns across the countertops, where she'd prepared thousands of meals for family gatherings. But today felt different, lighter somehow, as if the weight of deception and hidden agendas had finally lifted, leaving room for something more authentic to grow. Tommy burst through the kitchen door with his usual exuberance, now 9 years old, and somehow both more mature and more carefree than he'd been during those dark months when adult conspiracies had forced him to choose between the people he loved. "Grandma Z, happy birthday!" He wrapped his arms around her waist, and she marveled at how much taller he'd grown, how his face had lost some of its baby roundness and gained the sharper angles that reminded her increasingly of Robert at that age. "Thank you, my love. Are you ready to help me with the cake? Dad's bringing the ingredients you forgot to buy," Tommy said with the matter-of-fact tone children used for adult shortcomings. "He said you probably didn't forget, you probably just wanted us to feel useful." Zenaida smiled at her grandson's insight. David had learned to read her carefully over the past year, recognizing that many of her requests for help were actually opportunities for him to demonstrate reliability and care rather than genuine needs she couldn't meet herself. "Your father is getting very smart about his old mother. Dad says you were always smart, he just got better at paying attention." The simple observation carried layers of meaning that spoke to how much their family dynamics had shifted. David had indeed become someone who paid attention to patterns, to needs, to the subtle ways that trust could be built or eroded through daily choices. David arrived 20 minutes later, carrying grocery bags and wearing the kind of relaxed expression that had been absent from his face for years before the crisis. The financial counseling and debt restructuring had been painful, but they'd also freed him from the constant anxiety of juggling creditors and unrealistic expectations. "Morning, Mom. You look beautiful today." "You're required to say that. It's my birthday." "I'm required to call. I'm choosing to say you look beautiful." He kissed her cheek and began unpacking ingredients with the efficient movements of someone who'd learned to be genuinely helpful rather than performatively present. "Marcus called this morning. He wanted me to tell you he's thinking about you today and wishes he could be here." Marcus had been released from residential treatment 2 months earlier, but was living in a halfway house across the state, working at a nonprofit that helped other gambling addicts and slowly rebuilding his relationship with reality. The geographic distance was both practical and symbolic. He needed space to establish his recovery without the complicated emotional triggers of family dynamics, and the family needed time to adjust to the man he was becoming rather than the man he'd been. How did he sound? "Good. Clear. He's been clean for 43 days now, which he says is the longest stretch since he was a teenager." David paused in his unpacking. "He asked if he could call you later today, just to say happy birthday. Not to ask for anything or try to rush the rebuilding process, just to acknowledge the day." Zenaida considered this carefully. Phone calls with Marcus had been infrequent and structured, usually facilitated through his counselors or David, designed to maintain connection while respecting the boundaries that recovery required. But a birthday call felt different, more personal, more trusting. "I'd like that." The morning passed in comfortable activity, as 3 generations worked together to prepare for the small gathering they'd planned. Tommy helped measure flour and crack eggs, with the serious concentration he brought to all cooking tasks. David handled the more complex preparations while maintaining the easy conversation that had replaced the nervous chatter of his guilty period. Dr. Helena Martinez arrived at noon, carrying flowers and wearing the kind of smile that had become precious to Zenaida over the past year. Helena had evolved from family friend to trusted advisor to something like a sister, someone who understood the complexity of loving people who had proved capable of betrayal while still choosing to hope for their redemption. "The birthday girl looks radiant," Helena announced, embracing Zenaida warmly. "The birthday girl feels cautiously optimistic about the future. Given everything you've navigated this year, cautious optimism seems like the perfect emotional state." They settled in the living room while Tommy regaled them with stories from school, and David finished the final birthday preparations. The conversation flowed naturally between topics both serious and lighthearted. Helena's latest patients, anonymized but illustrative of human nature. Tommy's budding interest in science fair projects. David's new job with a nonprofit that helped small businesses avoid the kind of financial mistakes he'd made himself. "I have something for you," Helena said as they prepared to transition to the formal celebration, withdrawing an envelope from her purse. "It's not exactly a birthday gift, more like professional closure." Zenaida opened the envelope to find a formal letter on Helena's professional letterhead, documenting her psychological evaluation and mental competency assessment. The language was clinical but clear. Zenaida Matthew showed no signs of cognitive decline, demonstrated excellent judgment and decision-making capacity, and exhibited the kind of emotional resilience that suggested strong mental health rather than vulnerability requiring intervention. "Why now?" Zenaida asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Because this makes it official. If anyone ever questions your mental capacity again, if any future family members get ideas about guardianship or financial control, you have professional documentation of your competence from someone with impeccable credentials and no financial interest in the outcome. The thoughtfulness of the gift was overwhelming. Helena had taken it upon herself to create a permanent shield against the kind of manipulation they'd all lived through, ensuring that Zenaida's independence would be legally and professionally protected. Thank you. This means more than you know. Officer Janet Kim arrived shortly after, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing civilian clothes that made her look younger and more relaxed than she had during the crisis months when she'd been documenting potential elder abuse and family threats. Her presence today was purely social, but her friendship had grown from the professional respect they'd developed during the investigation. Mrs. Matthew, you continue to be the most interesting 73-year-old in Millbrook, Janet said with genuine warmth. Let's hope that's because I'm living well, not because I'm still surviving family conspiracies. Definitely the former. Though I have to say, watching you outmaneuver 3 people trying to manipulate you was like watching a masterclass in strategic thinking. They gathered around the dining room table that had seen so many family meals. But this time, the conversation carried none of the hidden tensions and coded communications that had poisoned previous gatherings. Instead, there was the easy intimacy of people who had survived a crisis together and chosen to build something new from the wreckage. Tommy insisted on leading the birthday song, his clear voice carrying the melody while the adults provided harmony. When Zenaida leaned forward to blow out the candles, she made a wish that was both simple and profound, for the strength to continue building this new version of family, with all its careful boundaries and hard-won honesty. As they shared cake and coffee, the phone rang. David answered and then looked to his mother with a questioning expression. "It's Marcus. Are you ready for that call?" Zenaida took the phone with steady hands, aware that everyone was watching, but trusting that her family had learned to respect her autonomy rather than try to manage her choices. "Hello, Marcus." "Hi, Mom. Happy birthday." His voice carried across the miles with a clarity that suggested sobriety and genuine emotion. "I hope you're having a good day." "I'm having a wonderful day. How are you?" "I'm good. Really good. I'm working at the nonprofit now, helping other people who've made the kind of mistakes I made. It's hard work, but it feels meaningful in a way nothing has felt meaningful for years. I'm proud of you for doing the work, sweetheart. I wanted to call today not just to wish you happy birthday, but to tell you something important. I've been working with my counselor on understanding the difference between making amends and asking for forgiveness. Making amends is about acknowledging harm and changing behavior. Asking for forgiveness is about wanting the other person to absolve you so you can feel better. Zenaida felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "What are you telling me, Marcus?" "I'm telling you that I'm focused on making amends. On being someone worthy of your love, whether or not you ever forgive me completely. I'm not calling to ask you to absolve me or to rush the process of rebuilding trust. I'm calling to let you know that I'm becoming someone who deserves a second chance, even if it takes years to prove it." The maturity in his voice, the understanding of the difference between accountability and absolution, told her more about his recovery than months of progress reports could have conveyed. "Marcus, that's the most hopeful thing you've said to me in years. I love you, Mom. I hope someday I can show you that love in ways that honor who you are, instead of trying to take what you have." After the call ended, Zenaida sat quietly for a moment, processing the conversation while her chosen family waited respectfully for her to share what she was comfortable sharing. "He's learning the difference between being sorry and being different," she finally said. "That gives me hope." The afternoon continued with the gentle rhythm of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. They played cards, looked through photo albums, and shared stories that ranged from silly to profound. Tommy regaled them with his latest theory about why mathematics was actually a form of magic, while David shared updates from his nonprofit work helping small business owners avoid financial catastrophe. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the dining room windows, Zenaida found herself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought them to this moment. A year ago, she had been the target of a coordinated family conspiracy designed to strip away her independence and control her assets. Today, she was surrounded by people who respected her autonomy, supported her choices, and valued her wisdom. The transition hadn't been easy. There had been months of careful boundary-setting, difficult conversations about trust and accountability, and the ongoing work of learning to love people while remaining vigilant about their capacity for self-interest over family loyalty. But what they had built was stronger than what they had lost. The new version of family was based on choice rather than obligation, on earned trust rather than assumed loyalty, on honest communication rather than polite pretense. "I have something to share with all of you," Zenaida said as they lingered over coffee and the last crumbs of birthday cake. "I've been working with my lawyers to restructure my estate planning again." The words created a moment of tension, reminders of how estate planning had been weaponized against her just months earlier. But she continued before anyone could respond. "The trust that Robert and I created has served its purpose. It protected my assets and tested character when testing was needed. But I don't want to spend the rest of my life holding money over people's heads like a sword of Damocles." She had their complete attention now. "So I'm creating a new structure, one that provides for family needs while maintaining safeguards against financial abuse. David, there will be provisions for Tommy's education and your continued recovery from business debt. Marcus will have access to funds for addiction treatment and recovery support, with built-in monitoring to prevent gambling relapses." David looked like he might cry. "Mom, you don't have to." "I want to, but there are conditions and they're non-negotiable. Continued therapy and financial counseling for both of you. Annual reviews with independent oversight. And absolute transparency about any financial difficulties before they become crises." "What about Lisa?" Tommy asked, his 9-year-old directness cutting through adult delicacy. "Your mother made choices that put her outside the family's financial safety net. That was her decision, and it has consequences. But she remains your mother, and the trust includes provisions for your relationship with her to be supported in ways that are healthy for you." Helena had been taking notes, her professional instincts activated by the legal and psychological implications of what Zenaida was proposing. "This is remarkably sophisticated planning," she said. "You're creating incentives for healthy behavior while maintaining protection against future manipulation. I'm creating a family structure that rewards growth and accountability rather than genetic connection and assumed entitlement." As the evening wound down and guests prepared to leave, the farewells carried weight beyond simple social courtesy. These people had become her chosen family, bound together not by blood or legal obligation but by mutual respect and shared commitment to honest relationship. Tommy's hug was fierce and uncomplicated. David's embrace carried gratitude and continued determination to prove himself worthy of trust. Helena's farewell included professional respect and personal affection. Janet's goodbye reflected the friendship that had grown from professional necessity. After everyone left, Zenaida sat in her quiet house and reflected on the day. The birthday celebration had been smaller than family gatherings once were, but it had been infinitely more genuine. The relationships represented were built on choice rather than obligation, on earned trust rather than assumed loyalty. She thought about Robert, wishing he could have witnessed the family's transformation. He would have been proud of how she had protected herself while leaving room for redemption. He would have appreciated the careful balance between love and boundaries that now defined their relationships. But most of all, he would have been amazed by Tommy, the brave little boy who had chosen truth over comfort, who had trusted his grandmother enough to reveal a family conspiracy, who had somehow maintained his innocence while developing wisdom beyond his years. The phone rang once more as she prepared for bed. Marcus again, his voice carrying excitement that she hadn't heard since before his addiction had taken hold. "Mom, I got promoted at the nonprofit. They want me to start leading support groups for family members affected by gambling addiction. People like David, like you. The people who get hurt when someone they love chooses addiction over everything else." "That's wonderful, sweetheart. It sounds like meaningful work." "It is. And Mom, today at the support group meeting I talked about you. About how you showed me that love and accountability aren't opposites, they're partners. How you saved my life, not by enabling my addiction, but by refusing to let me destroy myself and everyone around me. After the call ended, Zenaida prepared for bed with the satisfied exhaustion of someone who had navigated a significant milestone successfully. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose growth over comfort, new chances to demonstrate that wisdom and love could coexist with boundaries and self-protection. But tonight, she was simply grateful. Grateful for Tommy's courage, for David's determination to change, for Marcus's commitment to recovery, for Helena's friendship, for Janet's respect, for the possibility of redemption, and the strength to demand that it be earned. The family she had now was smaller than the one she'd thought she had a year ago, but it was infinitely more honest. And in that honesty, she had found something she hadn't even known she was missing. The peace that came from being loved, not for what she could provide, but for who she actually was. As she settled into sleep in the house that had once felt like enemy territory but now felt like sanctuary, Zenaida Matthews smiled at the knowledge that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room really was the one everyone underestimated. Sometimes that danger came from wisdom rather than weakness, from strength rather than vulnerability, from the quiet power of someone who had learned to protect what mattered most without sacrificing their capacity for love. The new foundation was built. Strong, honest, and ready to support whatever came next. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,